In today's video, I'm going to build a website that adds new content to itself every week completely automatically. I designed it with the look and feel of a newspaper with only the news that I'm interested in. And before I show you how to do it, let me briefly explain why you'd actually want something like this, because there are two main reasons. The first is for SEO purposes. If you automate a blog or a news page that adds fresh relevant content every day or every week, search engines like pages that update regularly, so this is a simple way to keep your site alive without writing every post by hand. The second reason is why I built it in the first place. I wanted to be up to date about all AI news, but that cost me a lot of time and many of the news items covered the same story. So I came up with the idea to build a website with the feeling of a single newspaper page that collects every AI news article for a week and then summarizes it the way that I like it. And in this video I show you the full process. First the concept, where I walk you through the design for the website in Figma, and then the single prompt that I use to build the actual website in Claude code, and finally the routine, which is the part that adds new content every week on autopilot. So let me first walk you through the design in Figma. And I almost always start my vibe coding projects with a design concept that I can use as a reference image alongside my text prompt later in Claude. For this design I wanted a newspaper style website because it matched the idea of getting a weekly news bulletin. So I went for a full black and white design, and I wanted it to look a little vintage, like an old school physical paper, and that's where the paper texture comes in. I went online searching for paper textures and I found this paper texture shader that was free to use, and it was actually perfect for what I wanted. With it you can create the exact textures that you want, and I wanted mine to be very subtle but still noticeable. Now for the layout itself, here at the top left I have the date, and I wanted this to update automatically. And for a typical newspaper style I added the edition number on the right and then this large heading in the middle. For the typeface I used crimson text, and this is a serif font, which was the most newspaper-like font that I could think of, and it's a free Google font. I really like the classic look of it, and it's the only font that I used, but I styled it in different ways to create hierarchy. For the masthead and the eyebrow headings, for example, I created an all capitalized version with lots of letter spacing. And finally, to make it a bit more interesting and to separate the sections, I added these thin dividers. Each article sits inside its own box, so it's clearly separated from the next one. And I wanted the design with only text, because that keeps the digest short and easy to read, because there's nothing but the news itself on the page. Okay, so with the design concept clear, let me show you the prompt that I used to build this in Claude code and walk you through the most important parts. And the way that I approach this prompt is section by section from top to bottom. I describe each part of the website one at a time, and I do this so that I'm able to clearly refer to different elements within the design. So I start with the header, and here I describe everything that I see one piece at a time. So first a thick black horizontal divider running edge to edge, then a row with the date on the far left and the edition number on the far right, then the next divider, then the masthead, and so on. I just go down the page and I describe every element that I see, and I try to be as detailed as I can. I write these descriptions using a voice transcriber. I just talk through everything I see out loud, and then I dump that text into a Claude chat and I ask it to turn that description into a clean, detailed prompt. After the header I describe the intro section, and for the article section I describe the structure that each single article should follow top to bottom. First the small date line, then a headline, and finally the body text. Each article follows that same internal structure. Next I describe the design choices, and these are the more detailed, specific design choices I made. For example, I set a max page width of 1400 pixels, and I know that number because I've made a lot of websites, so it's just a value that I've come to like, but it's not necessary at all. If you don't have a preference for the max width, that's totally fine too. Plus you can always ask Claude to help you make these kinds of decisions if you're unsure. Here I also describe the black and white color palette, the typeface, and the weight and the style rules. And then finally I end with the paper texture shader. Now this part is nice because I don't have to describe it in words. On the paper shader website I just dragged the sliders until I had something that I liked. Subtle but still noticeable. And I like these larger spots, for example, but if you don't like them you can just drag that slider down. And once I had a look that I was happy with, I copied the code block that the website gives you and I added it into my chat, and I asked Claude to include it in the prompt. And that way I knew that the texture would look exactly how I set it up right from the start. And I also mentioned that the texture comes from a shader library, and I give Claude the package name and the command line to install it. And that gives Claude everything it needs to add the texture the correct way. I'll add a link to the shader website in the description if you want to pay it a visit. To use this prompt I open Claude, I go over to the Claude Code tab and I start a new session. I create a folder on my computer where I want to store the project files, and inside Claude Code I select that folder. I'm using Opus 4.8 and I set the effort to high, which is plenty of intelligence to build this website. And then I paste in my prompt, I add the reference image of the Figma design and I just let it run for a few minutes. And it understood everything perfectly and built the whole website without any flaws. So the website exists, but it's still static, and now we're going to make it automatic, and there are 3 steps to this. The first step is adding the markdown file, and this file sits in the root folder of your project and it holds everything that Claude needs to know about the weekly run. This file basically tells Claude what it should and what it shouldn't do. So let's go briefly over what's inside and highlight the important parts, because there's one section here that really matters. When you build a website that automatically updates with new information, you are fetching data from websites online and putting it onto your own website, and there's a well-known security issue with that. What can happen is this, and this is the important part. When you fetch data from a website that's malicious, some people have hidden instructions inside that website's content that are aimed at your AI model, designed to override your instructions. And they use this to try to get sensitive information like API keys. For this website that's not really relevant, but if you want to build a blog with API keys, then that would absolutely matter. And you can handle this with clear trust boundary security rules. This part of the file makes the model aware of the risk and gives it strict rules for what it's allowed to do and what it's not allowed to do. It treats anything it fetches from a website as data to be summarized and never as instructions to follow. So now that you've secured this, you write your list of sources you want to use in the file. And as you can see, I'm using 3 Beehive newsletters here. These are all well known, so they don't have that issue I just described. And then in the same file, you can also describe your writing style. How long should each post be? How long should the titles be? How technical or how simple do you want the summaries? Any specifics you have, you add them here. For example, I tell it not to include any of the images from the original blog post because I want a text-only page. Okay, so the file's in the folder, and now for the second step I go back to the same Claude code chat where I built a website earlier and I give it a follow-up prompt. This prompt does the routine once manually. It runs through the whole process one single time, and after this one run everything is in place for it to simply repeat. And now the third step, which is the routine itself. In the Claude code section you have a routines button, and when you click it you can add a new routine, and here you get to choose between local and cloud. Local means it runs when your computer is turned on, and if your computer is turned off at the moment the routine is supposed to run, then it just catches up the next time that you turn it on. And cloud means it runs even while your computer is off, because it happens on Claude servers instead of on your machine. Now for this project I'm running it locally, and the reason for this is that the news site is just for myself. I want the news to be there when I'm at my computer, so local is fine. But if you wanted this to run on a live website, you would choose the cloud option instead. Then you connect your GitHub repository and you put the markdown file inside that repository instead of in a local folder. And the choice really depends on whether it's for you to use locally or for a live site. Once you click the new routine button, you give it a name, and then there's the field for the instructions. This is where you tell Claude what to do on each run, and the Claude website recommends keeping these instructions short and specific. So instead of writing everything out here, I just point it to the markdown file that I added in the first step, and I tell it to read that file and then execute it end to end. And if I were running this in the cloud, this is where I would point to the markdown file sitting in my GitHub repository instead. And that's it for setting up the automation with the routines feature. The result is a fully personalized website that automatically adds content based on your instructions. I've added the actual website files, the instructions, the full prompt and the markdown file to a free download in the description, so you can rebuild the site at your own pace. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions about the prompt, the routines or anything else that I used, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.